Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Melissa. Thank you, everyone, and good morning to all of you. And thank you for allowing me to share with you a little bit of my experience and a little bit of what I've learned as I teach students and work with students. Today, I'm here to, more than anything, talk about why is it important to have a multifaceted perspective on disciplinary learning. And it just takes for us to look around and look at our world and look at the abundance of data and information that we have, the explosion of science, to realize that we must be able to span all disciplines if we are to actually be able to grapple with the information and the new discoveries that we're having. We also need to be inclusive for the same reason that we're not keeping up with the pace of the impact that science is having in our society and in our world. We're not keeping up in the sense that we're not developing enough scientists. So we need to have a multifaceted approach so that we could be inclusive and be able to include the capital and the resources that we have, the human capital, more than anything. And most important, well, everything in our current world and our universe is intertwined. It's not mutually exclusive. In fact, by the nature of who we are, the space we occupy in our environment, we are interdisciplinary. So I think it just speaks about who we are when we actually engage other disciplines as well. And more important, as a scientist, we cannot just do science in isolation. We have to be socially embedded. So scientists need to be socially embedded and literate in other non-science disciplines, because other disciplines are an educational approach, a thinking about knowledge and how we approach broader and deeper understanding of ideas and the implications of our work in science. Scientists also need to be engaged in outreach so they could educate the public, so that we could have scientific literate public in the US. And it's unfortunate that only about a little bit over 50% of the science are actually involved in outreach. And I don't mean community outreach. This also includes media, interviews, and just informing the public about the work they do. Many of them claim because they don't have the time to do it, and I understand that in our world we're very, very busy. But as scientists, we have an obligation to be able to inform about our work to the rest of the world and to educate them as well. But most important, we have an obligation to engage on community outreach so the younger generation could be excited about science, so they could understand science and they could speak science. So my perspective is not from my research. The research I do is in mainly mathematical biology, and I do research in retinitis pigmentosa and mathematical physiology, modeling the degeneration of photoreceptors. But today I speak from what I have learned based on the approach that I've taken, my own experience, and things that I've been very successful on, because things that are truly in line with my passion. So George Nelson said, with the exploring impact of science and technology on every aspect of our lives, especially on our personal and political decisions that sustain our economy and democracy, we cannot afford an illiterate society. He said this more than a century ago, to be exact, 15 years ago. And unfortunately, we are at the same place. And not because we haven't made the efforts, but the efforts have been minuscule compared to the explosion and exponential growth of science. So it's really important that we are able to educate America about science. Many Americans support science. However, many of them don't understand science and don't know science. Very few people know the difference between evidence-based and opinion-based. And how can you make wise or educated decisions and choices if you don't know that the information that you're getting is based on evidence and facts or based on just someone's opinion? It is very important that we understand the process of research, the process of the scientific process. In particular, that we understand how investigation and analysis occur so that we could develop our critical thinking. It's very important that we educate our society in STEM and we make a STEM literate public. And you might ask, well, why is that important? Let the foreigners do the science. Let China and India do the science. We'll just be consumers. Well, unfortunately, to know science, you must do science. You cannot be educated in science without doing science. And too much is at stake to not be STEM literate. Innovation, progress, economic growth, global competitiveness, sustainability, health, longevity of our nation, and much more. we will not continue to have the position that we have in the world. We will not be able to enjoy the lifestyle that we have in America if we're only producing 19% of bachelor's degrees in science, when China and India are producing more than 50%. And that's the first degrees. Many of them get secondary degrees in science. So we really need to engage our public, let them be literate in STEM, but also encourage them to pursue a degree in science. STEM literacy is at the core of our ability to create better and smarter products, improve healthcare, preserve our environment, protect our nation's security, and much more. It defines our ability to make wise and well-informed decisions as consumers and citizens. It is critical for us to be STEM literate if we are to make good personal decisions. So it's in every aspect of our life. And science education might mean different things to different people. In fact, it might have different definitions. For me as an educator, I see science as a broader definition, not just discipline defined. I see science as an approach in how we think about various issues. It's not just about addressing complex issues, but more important, with all the scientific information that we're getting in our world today and the new discoveries, is really about basic knowledge. It's about being able to make good decisions. So science affects not just our knowledge base, but also our capability to decide things, to assess things, and the way we think, as well as the way we act, because our actions are guided by our decisions. Effective science education requires frequent, active, and hands-on learning that resembles how scientists work, being able to explore, think, and create. And that's what we have to do when we teach in our classroom. Unfortunately, currently, our teaching emphasizes quantity over quality, learning of answers rather than inquiry and exploration of questions, memory rather than critical thinking, gathering information rather than understanding the context, recitation rather than constructing arguments, reading and reciting rather than actually doing. We emphasize repetition rather than discovery. And we tend to tell our students to go do their work in isolation and alone, especially in the hard science, rather than in collaboration. And in reality, real science is done in collaboration. That real scientific enterprise is not done alone. So how can we expect our students to become scientists or embrace science when we're not teaching them the way that actually science is done, when they're not actually experience it and are able to envision themselves as scientists? Science topics need to be revised multiple times, not just once. Just because we cover it in one class doesn't mean that the student is really going to understand it. We need to actually introduce it multiple times and in different contexts, each time increasing the level of rigor and sophistication. And also introduce it in a different perspective, so they could connect the dots. Science needs to encourage and facilitate collaborative learning and challenge the students to extend their intellectual capacities. To learn science, one must do science. It requires exploration, making observation, taking wrong turns, realizing that science is not a straight pathway, but that we sometimes overshoot and we have to rethink and go back and analyze things, testing ideas. And more important, it requires also making physical and mathematical models so that we could test those ideas, so that we could actually make predictions. It requires wrestling with unfamiliar concepts and ideas, and with things that seem contrary to it, especially for our underrepresented minorities, for our students that come from low incomes, where science is not in their everyday life, where concepts of science are not part of their life. Many of the ideas that we're introducing to them might not seem as familiar as they are to us. And we need to allow them to have the time to wrestle with those ideas and really understand them in a deeper level. But more important, if we want to engage every one of our students, we must make sure that when we teach science, we bring out the passion and interest in our students. So how can we do this? Well, in science, it's very difficult sometimes to bring out that passion and interest and to make sure that students understand the importance of science when we really are not connecting with them. We're not really understanding what's important to them. But interdisciplinary work allows us to do that. Interdisciplinary work is really about being socially embedded as a scientist, but it also is about being connected with our students. It allows us to bring different disciplines together and span all of them at the same time, depending on the problem that we're addressing. And in reality, we cannot do without it. We cannot develop and grow as individuals without interdisciplinary work, especially given our current world that is so interdisciplinary and so connected with each other. We cannot contribute to the development of ourselves, our students, our society, or our well-being in the space that we occupy if we don't become interdisciplinary ourselves. Interdisciplinary work allows us to bring a global perspective into our research, scholarship, and teaching, and to truly be inclusive. Because with it, we are able to then reach to our students, grab their interests, and make it part of their learning. And in a few minutes, I'm about to talk about some of the projects that I've done. Projects that are student-driven, where the students chose the question based on their interests, based on what is important to them. And it's through interdisciplinary work that I'm able to then get them engaged in applied mathematics research because of things that they find important and that they care about. In STEM, it is easier to connect with our students and society and to bring a global perspective into our work if we actually are socially embedded individuals. And the way we are is by actually relating to others. And how do we relate to others and relate to other disciplines? Is by being interdisciplinary ourselves in the work that we do. Global perspective and interdisciplinary are crucial components of the development of society, students, and faculty. So in reality, I'm talking about interdisciplinary work, but because that's the venue for me to be able to bring a global perspective into my work. And it's the venue for me to be socially embedded and to be connected with my students and with my community as well. They are the link between our personal and professional goal, national priorities, students' passion, institutional and departmental expectations. And they can merge our teaching, service, scholarship, and research into a single priority. They are the priority that creates straight path for student success in STEM and our own development and growth. Why? Because interdisciplinary research, at least in my case, allows me to bring students into my research, get them excited about doing research and being scientists. But it also allows me to enhance my teaching. And then through working with students and mentoring through research, it allows me to actually be productive on my scholarship and my research. So I'm actually able to also move forward in my research and have publications as well. So it connects all of them. It actually brings all of them together. And you might ask, well, that's nice, that's interdisciplinary research. Now let's talk a little bit about inclusion and why it's important. Well, the STEM education in America currently is a leaking faucet, where minds and talents of millions of Americans are vastly underutilized. We are really not using our resources as we should. We are increasingly reliant on non-U.S. citizens to really carry out the STEM needs that we need to do in order to move forward in our society and in our world. Currently, the biggest growth of doctorate degrees in STEM are going to non-U.S. citizens, particularly individuals from China and India. And the biggest problem is that right now, most of the jobs are actually STEM related. They're growing vastly. In the last 10 years, they grow threefold compared to the non-STEM jobs. So if we are not creating scientists, and the jobs that we currently have are for scientists, who are we going to hire? I mean, that's a huge reliance on foreign human capital. And we cannot afford that. Not when we have so much talent. Not when we have so many citizens that are in our classrooms. We could actually create more talent. Our resistance to draw from all of our demographic sources is really becoming our demise. I tell my students, if you don't become STEM literate, whether you decide to go into humanities or not, you know what's going to happen? Sooner or later, you're not going to have a job. And not just you, all your classmates are not going to have a job. And I don't know if you've ever been to Mexico or any of the South American countries, but believe me, we are going to become a third world country ourselves. We've been able to keep up, but we are really getting behind. We cannot afford to not develop scientists and not develop a STEM literate public. We need to recognize that diversity is actually an asset. Increasing the number of underrepresented minorities in STEM, as well as women, does not just increase the talent pool for the workforce, but it actually enhances innovation, strengthens our sustainability, improves our global economic leadership, and enriches everyone's life. So we really need to think about that. It is really disturbing when we look at the data of where we stand in terms of underrepresented minorities in STEM. Currently, only 2.2% of the universities awarded in science and engineering for individuals under the age of 24 go to Hispanics and Latinos. And then 2.7% for African Americans and 3.3% for Native Americans. And that's at the bachelor level. This is really disturbing. This is really a disgrace. If we are educators, what are we doing? Especially if you're in the science. So I take this as a personal challenge because I am a scientist. And I look at these numbers. And I'm in Arizona, which is a state with a lot of underrepresented minorities. I am not doing my job if I'm not contributing to changing these percentages in this breakdown. And you should be thinking the same. You should be reflecting of what are you doing to contribute to change this. For women, the same. Women make 50% of our general population, yet only 25% of them occupy the STEM jobs in the workforce. And one out of every five receives a bachelor's in science and engineering and computer science. So really, we're not doing our job. We say it's getting better. There's more women going into colleges and universities, yet they're not earning STEM degrees. So what are we doing wrong? Well, then we could only reflect on things that we do. As educators, we need to look at what we do in the classroom. What are we doing to really enhance the educational experience of our students? And for us, I think in terms of developing students, the starting point should be the personal experience, the cultural perspective, the interest, and passion should be right where we begin our conversation about how we're going to develop new scientists, how we're going to teach our students to embrace science. Critical thinking, problem-solving skills, creative analytical skills, and STEM knowledge cannot be fully developed if we neglect the very foundation of who we are and what makes us tick and what is so familiar to us. And you know what? As a science educator, we do that every single time that we walk into the classroom. We neglect the foundation of our students. We neglect who they are. And we're speaking to them about science. We teach them of the importance of science just for the sake of science. We don't relate it to their communities. We don't relate it to who they are. We don't relate it to what's important to them. And honestly, I think for me, many people ask me, what was it that got you to where you are today? I think it was great mentors, perseverance, and not wanting to be poor. I was so tired of being poor. And that was the reason why I stuck with math. And since I was not very good at writing and reading, well, math was the least of the evils, right? But it was not because I realized, oh, that's how it connects to me. That's how it connects to the things I'm interested in. But I think I learned over the years that if we're able to connect it to our students, then we are able to engage them. And learning starts by being interested, having curiosity, and finding a particular topic important. That's why global perspective and understanding who our students are is very, very important. I'm not asking you to change what you're covering in class. I'm not asking you to change the way we do science. But I am asking you to change the way you teach science and the way you approach science when it comes to teaching it to our students. Because we are not connecting with them. We're leaving out a huge portion of our population. We're leaving out underrepresented minorities, we're leaving out women, and we're leaving out students that come from disadvantaged economic backgrounds. Students that cannot understand. If you're teaching a student who comes from a family of doctors or bachelors in science, they probably have an idea of certain topics that you're talking about. They have a connection with that. But if you're talking to students whose parents didn't even finish high school, they really don't understand, they really don't know. So we really need to make a conscious effort to be inclusive. Cultural perspective and personal experience do not necessarily change, like I said, how we do STEM. They just change the way we view things, what we view to be important. So when we include cultural perspective and personal experience into our teaching, the students start to see science as being important. They understand now. They get it. They get why they need to learn it. And not only that, they're passionate about it. Therefore, they're willing to take whatever it takes to get that science degree. We as educators have a responsibility to help students develop as future scientists, leaders, and science literate individuals capable of making wise, educated decisions. So we need to engage our students in science, not just because we want them to become scientists, even though that's usually my personal goal, but it's to really make sure that once they get out of school, they're able to make wise decisions about their lives and about our country as well. And how can we accomplish this? Well, like I said, we must help develop them using who they are and what they bring as a foundation. Incorporate global perspective into what they're learning. And this requires taking time, especially at the beginning, to know what's important to them, so that we could tailor specific examples, topics to their interests. For example, if I have a calculus class full of pre-med students, and I'm going to talk about rate of change and the derivatives, I'm not going to talk about, velocity and a particle moving. I'm going to talk actually about blood moving through the arteries and what happens if it slows down and it gets clogged. How do you end up with varicose veins? Or I'm going to talk about health disparities in different communities. So I'm going to talk about things that I know are going to catch their interest. And that's what we need to do. When we look at our students and then tailor examples, even if they're phenomenological examples that are kind of make-believe, but put it in a context that they understand why it's important to learn that particular topic. It also calls for having student-driven projects, and that's key. Letting students select their own questions in general, and then with the help of the faculty in meeting multiple times and mentoring, make it into a feasible project that they could actually do and where they could have ownership of it. That's very, very important, because we need to allow our students to envision themselves as scientists, and we need to bring them to the table. Think of them as collaborators, individuals that are equal, so they could themselves see themselves as scientists and then say, I could do science. So we need to, like I said, that's how I mainly encourage my students to become applied math majors or math majors in general, is by having them work on research projects, whether it's in class or outside the class, where they select their own questions, where it's not a project from the back of a book. No, it's an open-ended question. I don't have the answer, they don't have the answer, but they're about to learn a lot about that topic, and I'm about to learn with them. That enhances the students' critical thinking, allows them to formulate arguments, and create something of their own for the first time. So for the first time, science and their personal experience becomes one, because here they're creating something that is their own, and they feel so intimate with it, and at the same time so intimate with science. So I allow them in classroom to also do projects that are hands-on, which contribute significantly to the way they understand the concept and the topic that is being addressed. Projects that allow students to construct models, physical models that test ideas. And that is a big challenge for all of us, including myself, and it requires a lot of time. But I know that that's the point where I'm going to turn them and when I'm going to get them engaged in the topic. Research allows students to wrestle with unfamiliar ideas, explore questions, and take their own turns, but at each step, discover new things. And at each step, reinforce the science they are learning. And this can be embedded within a course, or it could be offered as a separate research project that is done in the summer, year-round, and it depends on what the resources are of the department and the time constraints that you have as a faculty as well. And here I'm about to show a few examples. So that's how I approach the students. And no, I am not an expert in drug abuse or Vitakin or anything, but there was a student that she was really interested in understanding why is it that prescription drugs in particular are now leading to this huge overwhelm of addiction in our society, especially in places like Texas and Florida. So she started to do the research. She got in another 3 students excited about it. And they decided to do a model about Vatican abuse to determine the most effective strategies of reducing the overall population of Vatican users. So with students, I always ask them, well, we're going to start with a conceptual model of your understanding of how things work. And in mathematics, a great way to do that is through a bath model or a compartmental model, where you divide the different populations into different classes. In this case, we have medicated users of Vatican, chronic users at the first stage, and then chronic users that have been using it for longer, abusers, and then treatment. And then we asked ourselves, based on data, where are individuals going? Are they coming back from one class to another class? If the probability of them doing that, or the statistics shows that that's very negligible, we don't include that. But that's one of the type of works that we do. Then we turn that into equations. And many times I tell students when I introduce certain models to my calculus class, I say, you see, we only have derivatives. That's what we have. We have derivatives, and we're describing how the rate of change of those particular variables is how they're changing with respect to time. But in reality, they're differential equations. But I get them excited to take the next class, the next math class. So in this particular project, we actually also look at the sensitivity. We did a sensitivity analysis to realize which parameters were the ones that were more influential. So we were actually to have some treatment. Would that really make a difference? And then we actually considered two different states. Based on the data, we estimated the parameters, and we simulated to see where are things going. In one case, you have abusers really rising up by the dashed blue line. In another case, you have them pretty much staying stable and then decreasing a little bit. And again, because we have two different kinds of states, we have two different kinds of results. Another one was trying to understand the role of diet and exercise in type 2 diabetes. And that came from a project that students were interested in, looking at how obesity is contributing substantially to type 2 diabetes, the rise of type 2 diabetes. And in fact, one of the students, she read a paper on how a study predicted that if in a population where they did clinical trials, they put them into a very strict diet regime and exercise regime, some of them were actually able to prevent progressing into type 2 diabetes. So the student wanted to understand how life change in terms of diet and exercise could affect type 2 diabetes. And of course, we look at data to try to understand it a little bit better. We look at what the models have been out there, and we started with one of the models of beta cells and glucose insulin. So everything in black comes from a model that is already out there. In red is what the students decided to change. And in particular is adding triglycerides, the rate of change of triglycerides, how that accumulates and how that degrades, and how that plays a role in insulin and in glucose. And then we did simulations. What happens for modern exercise, modern to high exercise? Well, you see that for modern to high exercise, you have two solutions for your beta cells. The red one, pretty much all your beta cells die, which means you pretty much become pretty severe type 2 diabetic person. And then you have the blue one, in which your beta cells increase to some stable level. With low exercise, we have the scenario for both low starting point of beta cells and high starting point of beta cells. They both go down, if you could see in this graph. And then we asked what happened for a high triglycerides-rich diet. Well, if we start with a high level of beta cells, no matter what, they still die at the end. The same thing if we start low. But if we have a low triglycerides-rich diet, it doesn't matter if we start a little bit low in our beta cells, they actually are going to grow. And then eventually they go to a steady state. And then what we realize is that if you look at the rate of triglycerides accumulation, you could divide your solutions of the beta cells into two different categories. In one case, you have two different solutions that you could go to. In another one, there's nothing more than except the beta cells going to zero and dying. So that gets insight into the role of beta cells in exercise in the progression of type 2 diabetes. And then there was another group that decided to work on how is it that college drinking spread, particular binge drinking. So again, They did some literature review, extensive literature review, to try to understand some of the components that affect college drinking, but also building from certain models that were already there. And they divided the population into abstainers, social drinkers, problem drinking, and binge drinking. And the way individuals moved from one class to another was based on dropout rates or graduation rates, individual risk, social interaction with one another, and social norms, what perceives to be the right thing. And then they created their model. Because since we were doing with a college model, we had to have a resetting equation. In other words, an equation that allows us to input new students at the beginning of every year, since the other ones were graduating. So we had a differential equation model combined with a deterministic model, with a discrete equation. And then we did simulations. And here we have just an average school. If you look at binge drinkers, that's the blue, we see how it actually goes down and it settles to some kind of periodic because of the entering and exiting of the school, but it actually settles down. Not only that, what we did is our model, all our parameters were dependent on wetness, the wetness of the campus, how loose the policies of drinking were. But then the students said, well, in college campuses, it's not about, the differential equation is good, but really what determines whether you get influence on drinking or not has to do with who you're connected to and how closely you're connected to them. For example, in fraternities, you probably are most likely to drink than if you're going to, let's say, if you're in a Bible study or a religious group. So they wanted to actually move into a network model. And that's not my area of expertise, but I said, okay, we'll do whatever we can, we will try to address it. And we looked at we first of all starting by considering a very simplistic network where we have a student, the one in blue, and whether he moves to one compartment or another is going to depend on his own ability to be influenced, but as well as the strength of the influence of the neighbors around him. And then, and based on not only the strength of the neighbors around him, but also whether those individuals are drinkers or non-drinkers, defined by a certain value, and then we sum them all up, we will actually determine where our individual here in the center ends up going at the next stage. So they did that, and they created with very basic. They couldn't include all the parameters that were included in the other model, but at least they were able to include just the influence of those neighbors if you're connected to them, and they were able to create a model that was a network model and simulate it and see what happens, how long it takes for different campuses. Let's start with a very huge population of drinkers. What happens to those that start with a very small population of drinking, but then they have very loose policies when it comes to drinking? What happens as well? And they were able to get an idea. Another student was interested in looking at gonorrhea transmission in a male-seeking male population and looking at specifically the education, whether education plays a role in the decreasing the epidemic of gonorrhea. And he did a sensitivity analysis and realized that, in fact, here the parameter alpha sub 1, which is the average rate of self-protection, is the one to which the system is more sensitive to. So we really want to decrease the number of gonorrhea cases. We really need to encourage self-protection and even facilitate distribution of condoms and things like that. So that was another one. And then I have a student whose kid has some psychological issues, and she wanted to understand a little bit more the role of iron in Friedreich's ataxia, because it was something that was very personal to her. And so we created a model, and here I team up with a colleague who is a chemist in chemistry to try to understand cellular iron homeostasis and the balance of iron and how that affects things, and whether treatment can help. And we try different treatment regimes, and what we learn is not just how much treatment you give, but when you give the treatment that really defines whether you're able to control and bring down the levels of iron when there's too much of them, and potentially stop Friedreich's ataxia from becoming a problem. Another one was a student that wanted, after the big economic crash, wanted to understand whether fanatic consumerism was what led to our economic crash. He said, we buy too much in America. we're influenced by TV too much. And I said, well, if that's what you believe, go read about it, learn about it, and if you could develop a mathematical model, then you could test your theory. So he did. And this was in a classroom. This was in a differential equation classroom. And the students were saying that it was a little bit unfair because the project starts 4 weeks before the end of the class. And we still have exams, we still have homework, we still have everything. But I tell students, that the project's supposed to be something that you really are interested in doing, that you have to really embrace. So he created here we have your compartmental model, where he looked at moderate consumers, rational consumers, and impulsive buyers or consumers. And he looked at the influence of, like I said, different things, media influence, how that influenced them going from one class to another. And what he realized, if you increase kappa, which is, I think, the influence of media, depending on where they start, depending on, in one case, you could see that the impulsive consumers just rise really high, and the moderate and rational ones just decline. In another case, the impulsive consumers still stay high, but everything is more under control in plot 3. So he was able to come up with some results, make some conclusions. And one of the parts of the projects they do, I always ask them, well, what is missing? If there's something that didn't quite answer the question you were looking at, or the answer was not what you were expecting, try to understand, is it a flaw in the model? Is it a flaw in the way we went about constructing the model? What could have been done better? Another individual wanted to look at how charismatic leaders lead an entire population to become fanatic. And what he decided to do is look at small networks and consider the Nazi regime and see if one could explain how individuals could blindly follow a leader, just based on the influence they have from other individuals, if they're well connected. So, and another individual wanted to look at the influence of Americanism. So why is it that Latinos, African Americans, and Asians are becoming so Americanized? When they first come, they're very rooted on their culture, and eventually they become very Americanized. So trying to understand the melting pot of cultures, in particular, she wanted to look at Los Angeles area. And she looked at different factors: gender, language, education, income, and tried to analyze what was going on. And then created a network model where she divided the population also based on their communities and their neighborhoods. So neighborhoods that were more known to be Hispanic versus African American versus Asian. And see what happens to the individuals that are at the borders of those neighboring towns. So it was a big project, and we needed more data and more stuff to do. But she was able to get a little bit of insight. So that is just a window of different projects I've done, and didn't mean to bore you. And the reason why I wanted to show this whole set of projects is because they're not in my area of research. They're not what I do, but I learned through the students. In fact, my current area of research, retinitis pigmentosa, or trying to investigate degenerative disease of the eye, came about from a student's project. And I worked so hard on it, and I got so interested in it, and that's how my research developed. And now I created the first model for receptors degeneration. And in fact, the Institute of Paris, the Institute of Vision in Paris, the director of the institute invited me last year to go give a talk because of the model. And we're currently collaborating. So what I'm trying to say is that many times we as educators consider doing research with students as a burden, something that is going to slow us down. And I don't think that that's the right perspective to have. Is it going to take time? Yes. Is the learning curve going to be steep? Yes. But the responsibility is on the student to learn about the project, to educate you about the project, to summarize all the relevant articles for you. So they just bring you the set of articles that are relevant, so then those are the ones that you consider. But I think at the end, the outcome is amazing because you're moving forward in research. Because whenever I work with students, I try, and not all my projects have been published, but I try to publish them because I think that I already invested the time. I might as well get something out of it. And if I don't publish them, I use them as a leeway to make collaborations with other colleagues. And that's one way, but also the teaching. That's the most important thing. A lot of the students, before they started doing research with me, they didn't want to go to graduate school. They wanted to graduate and go make money. And many of them didn't want to go into mathematics or apply math. And every one of those projects, students are in a math doctorate degree. In fact, one of them is a year away from finishing. So I think it's a win-win situation. I think when students get to see something they created, something that is so intimate to them and so important to them, and they see what they could do with mathematics or with science, they get really excited. They finally, like I said, get the importance of science. So I think we really need to do that. Like I said, we need to really bring that in our students. And part of that is to make sure that the research or the project we're suggesting are tangible to are things that students could reflect on and connects to their community. It also that allows them to be scientists. You know, if they cannot imagine themselves as scientists, they're not going to want to be scientists. We want them to take part of the scientific enterprise, and that's a great way to do that. And to make sure that, you know, that the passion of the student is incorporated into what we're doing. And that requires sometimes consulting with other faculty, not just trying to do it on your own. But from day one, the most important thing that we should do is we should make sure that students understand the importance of the course or the topic they're about to learn. And the way we do it is we get to know them first. And we right away think about how we're going to connect it. And we could do it. Before my classes, I looked at my roster. And based on their last name, I figure more or less their ethnicity. And not only that, I look at their major. So I try to introduce examples that would talk to the entire classroom, not just to one student. And like I said, bringing problems that are relevant is very important. And for that, we definitely need institutional commitment, because it requires training ourselves, if we're not interdisciplinary yet, training ourselves to be interdisciplinary. But it also requires forming groups of faculty that could co-teach courses so that they could become more interdisciplinary without being a complete burden in one faculty. So the institution has to be behind us completely, 100%, if we are to change this. But like I said, and with all the science that are exploring that are so interdisciplinary, there's so many different new courses that one could create, you know, that quantitative genetics, forensic science, epidemiology courses that you could teach with someone in public health, eye physiology. They could be taught by a faculty, but also a physiologist himself. And models that are not just in biology, but they incorporate computer science as well. So there's a lot of rooms to be created when it comes to disciplinary work. In fact, I have a student, she's a math major. She's an applied statistics major. And she's also an English major. And in talking, I suggested that she should start looking at literature and look at the consistency of words that come out in literature. She does literature from many years back. And I said, and see if somehow the consistency of different words or phrases could be a predictor, not just of the state, the state of the country at that time, the political climate, but also a predictor of what's to come. So she's looking at that, and she's considering that with another professor in English. So even when even in other areas, we could always learn. We could always be able to use STEM, our STEM knowledge to make it a better experience for the students. And like I said, in terms of projects, you could do the spread of gangs and fanatic groups. You know, one of the projects I presented, the rise of diabetes. Or even how to mitigate diabetes in our community. Spread of social dynamics, alcoholism, or the spread of information through the internet. With Twitter and Facebook, one could actually access a lot of data to do things like that. And of course, like I said, it's a big learning curve for the faculty. It's not going to be easy, but it's really going to be rewarding. And it's really going to make teaching a much funner enterprise for yourself, but also for the students. They're going to realize that learning is not just about sitting there and doing and just listening and reading, but it's actually about doing it. And they have to go out and do it themselves and challenge themselves. And so, like I said, for faculty, you need to be fully committed. willing to put the extra time as a mentor, and willing to learn new topics outside of our comfort zone. Like I said, there's many times when students will come with something that I'm just like, oh, that's not in my area. And of course, and I listen to them, so for a while I'm the student. I'm the student that is confused, that is not understanding where things are going, that is not understanding what the problem is. In fact, yesterday I had a conversation with two students who are working on a model. They're trying to somehow replicate data from seizures to test if this model actually accurately could replicate the data. And I said, okay, so why are we doing this? Why do we care this? And after 40 minutes, they said, well, because many times when you go into, it takes a long time, it's very expensive for a doctor, a neurologist, to actually decide based on your brain activity whether you could potentially be at that breaking point of a seizure or not. And if we could somehow have certain indicators through this model, flags, that it could be programmed into a computer, and you go to the doctor, they hook you up, and they read your scan, and then you're able to see, okay, you're prone to that. Then that would allow you and your insurance to go to a neurologist, and they get a more deeper and concrete evaluation. So that, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. But even the math that we're doing is a little different than what I do. But I'm learning with them. And it's a challenge, and it takes time. But like I said, at the end, it's a win-win situation. For me, it has allowed me to start with new collaborations, more publications. It expands my research agenda and branches to other fields that I was unfamiliar to. And it expands my expertise, my research network, out within my institution and outside as well. And, it allows me to also, every semester, to be able to think in a creative way. Maybe not changing the context of the course, but changing certain things. And it allows me to also have, sometimes what we need, I could apply for a little bit of seed money with my institution to sponsor the students so they could go to conferences and present their work, so they could buy their supplies they might need. So I definitely need administration support behind to be able to do certain things, right? And I think that's something that administrators should know, that if we are to attain higher success among underrepresented minorities and women in STEM, we really do not just give moral support to our faculty. That's great. We need financial support as well, because many times underrepresented minorities, they come from low-income families, have to work, so they don't have the time to invest in doing research. They don't have the option of going and doing a summer research experience somewhere else because they have a family to take care of. But if we in our institutions could provide funding from them, they could also have the same experience that other students have. And that's very important. In terms of classroom, like I said, administrators in the institution need to understand that you cannot expect to have a course be truly interdisciplinary with just one person with one single set of expertise. You need to really have co-teaching courses, and for that requires paying two salaries at the same time. But the experience and the outcome would be much greater. And but I think one of the things that the institutions and administrators need to realize, that when you have students really excited about what they do, when they graduate, they're going to have a really good commitment to that institution. So they're going to come back as alumni, and they're going to donate, and they're going to be able to contribute to the institution again. So it's not, it might look like an investment that is going nowhere, but it's an investment that is going to come back in tenfold to the institution. And for students, like I said, to me, that's the way that I've been able to engage underrepresented minorities. It's very hard to engage them in mathematics just because mathematics is important. If I just tell them mathematics is important and I give them examples from the book that they have already read, they still don't find it important. But if I actually allow mathematics to play a role in something that they think is really important, I have them. At that point, they became complete believers, and they will go in that direction. So, like I said, my last piece of advice for you is, being interdisciplinary takes time, but it actually allows us to develop ourselves. And you should think about that. When you're doing research with students, I always think about that. I think, okay, I document things because I said, okay, is this going to be a paper that I'm going to write that is scientific, or is this going to be more like an educational paper that I could write? So as long as you document document what you're doing and you take notes, even that experience where we're teaching students, we could actually get something out of it that is for our own benefit. So that's something to keep in mind. And like I said, make every teaching opportunity a scholarship opportunity for that same way. And that's exactly what I just said, that you could always write a paper, or you could develop a course based on what you're learning, or you could define your research and through mentoring and be able to speak on that. So now that I bore you to death, do you guys have any questions?
One of the things I found really, really helpful about this talk was how concrete you were with specific examples of projects, because that's where I've had a disconnect a lot of times with knowing that projects are good, but not knowing what the projects look like. Is there a certain way that we can empower people in the math community to be more confident with these components? You're talking about explaining to the students at the very beginning how this subject is relevant. You have concrete examples of interdisciplinary teaching. You have concrete examples of published projects. Is there a way to use all that work to increase the confidence of math professors who might be wanting to try this but feel overwhelmed?
I see what you're saying. It is, it's a little bit overwhelming. I think my thing is always, it's everything about learning. Even when things go wrong, right? I tell students, we could write about it. We could talk about it. And it's just a matter of trying it and doing it. So, like I said, many of the projects that haven't worked allow me to make examples from my classes. So from the projects that I'm working with the students, I could get examples that I could talk in class, even though I know they didn't work. And many times, so I know that it's scary. It's scary not knowing where you're going to go, where the answer is. And I tell the students many times when they pick the project, they say, and when they're frustrated, they say, well, where are we going? And I said, I don't know. You pick the project. I don't know. I'm here just joining you. So, and I said, and that's research. I tell them that's research. We don't know where we're going to go, but like I said, but we are going to learn something. And we just keep, the thing is so it's, like I said, it's difficult to not, to be confident about it. But I think eventually you learn. I think what makes you confident is falling down and getting up. Falling down and getting up. You learn that, you realize that there is no reward in doing things when you never fail. But when you have failed and then you don't fail, then the reward becomes much greater. And I think with teaching, sometimes, currently I'm revamping the entire way that I'm teaching calculus to make it more rigorous. We're doing proofs. And not absolute proofs, but proofs that give intuition of the definition of the derivative and things like that. And the first week or the first 2 weeks, I was depressed. Because I went from 35 to 20. And I was like, oh God, someone's going to come and I'm going to get fired soon. But, I thought to myself, but I really believe this is the way they should learn. And now they're actually getting it. And initially, the first exam, they bombed it, but like I told them, I look at the progress. And honestly, I really take that very seriously, your progress. And I know that this exam is probably you did horrible because it was the first exam. You didn't know what you were expecting from me. Now, the next one, you'll know exactly what you were expecting. And the next exam, they did great. And I think they're getting it. And yes, granted, I have only 19 students, but out of 35. But my attitude was, sometimes you have to take that risk. This is the first time I'm doing this with this course. So I had to take that risk and hope for the best. But at the same time, like I said, realize that I'm also learning. That there's things that sometimes I do and I say, okay, that was a little too much. I need to step back. So I think that the problem with instructors is that we get comfortable. And we cannot afford to get comfortable. Because the minute that we get comfortable, we're not being innovative. We're not being innovative in our teaching, and we're not being innovative in the things that we do. So I think having that fear of failure or that lack of confidence is actually good because that means we're not comfortable. So we're going to do our best. And like I said, with me, has just been doing it over and over and failing terrible. I had, like I said, with my differential equation course, I had all the classroom going to complain to my director or about the unfairness of doing a project that is 4 weeks long and we still have to do all that. So then I had to compromise with the students. I had to tell them that, that if they really learn from the project and do a great job, then the last midterm would replace that grade, or they could take the midterm. So I think sometimes I need to take chances like that. I think my time's up, but I'll be around if you have any questions.
I was actually coming up to say that we have time for one more question. I know there was a young woman over here who had a question. We have about a minute or two left. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Erika. Hi, remember me.
I know her.
I was wondering, you talk about doing this in your differential equations class. Have you also done these projects in first semester calculus classes?
Yes, I have done them.
And are they group-based projects? And if so, I notice a lot of them are these differential equations ones that they don't have the skills to solve yet. So how can they actually follow through with some of that?
So in calculus, I've done mainly like period doubling, exponential decay type of models. So just looking at the derivative and trying to model something with the derivative. I've also done problems that deal with optimization that are more. They're not really open-end research. They're smaller. But I've also done like with probability, and I think those ones have been great because then students see the utility of math, even though they're not as open-end question. They're more like projects that are more tangible.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Now it is time. Thank you so much. Let's join Dr. Erika Camacho. Thank you. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us this morning.